Service Parody and Melba here. We're going to be teaching you the song Raggy Levy, as played by Jake Xeres Fussell on his self-titled album. Originally it's by the Georgia Sea Island Singers, that's where he sourced it from. There's a field recording which was taken by Alan Lomax that you can go back and listen to. There's a couple different versions of it on YouTube, so I definitely recommend going back and checking out the original version before getting into this. But it's a very fun guitar part to play, a modern twist on the song that Jake made up, and also is a fun song to sing. As we look at the first couple measures, those are going to be the intro. In fact, we really want to think of the first 6 beats as being the intro. So my thumb is going to be playing string 6 and alternating down to play the 4th and 3rd string. Just playing a bass pattern there with the thumb. It's okay if you hit a little bit of the B string, that'll sound good too. And I encourage you not to be too hung up on how many strings you hit each time. It's not about being incredibly precise. It's just about finding a nice rhythm and groove. So sometimes you might just catch 2 strings, sometimes 3. It all is part of the chord, so it's going to sound nice as we do. So those first 6 beats are really what you hear as the intro when you listen to that version from his self-titled album. And then the next thing that we see after that, beats 3 and 4 of that second measure, that's really kind of the pickup that's going to kick off the main theme. So you can see over here on my fretting hand, my ring finger is playing the 3rd fret of the low E string. My pinky is playing the 3rd fret of the high E string. If that's not too much of a stretch for you, that's going to be a really efficient fingering to operate out of whenever we're on G in this song. So if you can do that, start there. If you need to do a different fingering, that's fine too. But this will leave your other 2 fingers free, and it will give them a little bit of an easier time getting to the other chord changes. So we just stay in that shape after we play that little 6-beat intro with the thumb. And then what we're going to do is we're going to play this little theme on G. So in that theme, you notice that on the B and the high E string, there were a couple times in there where we're sounding 2 notes at once. In the middle finger, much like what the thumb was doing just a moment ago, the middle finger is just brushing up this time. And it's brushing up, and we're trying to hit there the high E and the B string. And in between, you notice there is that one little note that my index finger grabbed between those 2 brushes up with the middle finger. So much like before, don't get too focused on how many strings you're hitting. You just want to get that nice, strong, percussive brush sound, and it's all about the rhythm. And if we get an extra note in there, it's still going to be part of that G chord, so it'll sound just fine. Now the bass there was pretty simple. I was just alternating 6, 4, 6. Okay, as I get to the second beat of, let's call this measure 1 for the rest of the time here, because where we see the repeat symbol, everything to the right of that is where we're kind of getting into the real structure of the song. So we're going to call this measure 1 from here on out. So don't pay attention as much to the numbers you see at the beginning of the lines. I'm going to be referencing everything to that repeat symbol. So we're in measure 1 after that repeat symbol. We already played that last bit of our G. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fret the 2nd fret of D with the middle finger. We can relax the other fingers. And our thumb is coming down to the 4th string in the bass. It's alternating down on that 2nd beat. And we're going to do another pinch there. Again, brushing some notes with the middle finger. So all these double notes that you see throughout the tab are all going to be these brushes up with the middle. If it's a single note on the B string, then just use your index to grab that note. And now we're on E minor. We're going to stay there and add that on. So let's back up just a little bit. I'm going to go to the 2 beats that you see right before the repeat symbol, what I called the pickup earlier. Okay, we've got one more note there in that first measure, which is the 1st fret of the 2nd string. I'm going to fret that with my index finger. I'm really heading to the C chord that is in that 2nd measure, so the middle finger doesn't have to move. And as I'm bringing the index to pick that 1st fret of B, my ring finger can be heading to the 3rd fret of A, my pinky to the 3rd fret of the high E string. And now I have my C form, which is mostly all I need for the 2nd measure. So you notice there, the only thing that happened on my fretting hand was my ring finger rocked up to that third fret of the low E right here on beat 3. Otherwise, it's all in the chord form that we start out with. As we get to measure 3, we can relax the middle and index finger, just lift them off, leave the ring and pinky on. We're back on our G form. We're going to play string 6 in the bass, brush down on 4 and 3 in the bass, back to 6. Okay, we're going to do a little brush up on the and of that third beat, on the second and the third string, using the index finger. And then the middle finger is going to fret the second fret of D, and that's going to give us our final bass note. As we come to measure 4, which is the first measure of the second line, we can take our middle finger off that second fret of D, open that string back up, and on the first 2 beats of this measure, we're going to play. So notice we have that same brush up with the index that we had in the other measure before this. Okay, the reason I only have us play that first half of the measure is this is an important moment because we're actually back at the pickup at this point. So the next 2.5 measures we've already played up to this point. Hi, Melba. Melba loves Jake Xeres Fussell. Big fan. So we're going to do 2.5 measures of repetition next, so you can see what we're about to play from beat 3 of the first measure on line 2 all the way to the end of the C chord measure is something that we already played in the first line. So let's just hear that again. So that's exactly like we've already done. Coming to that final measure of the second line, we were on our C shape. We can relax all our fingers, except for the pinky. I'd leave that down there again on the third fret of the high E string. Your thumb is going to reach over to fret the second fret of the low E string. So we're just going to get nice and snug to that fret wire with the thumb. And that's going to allow us to play this 8th note pair as our first bass note. We're going to pick that second fret, and then we're going to hammer onto the third fret with the ring finger. So we have a little pair of 8th notes there as our first bass pattern on the low E string. And then the thumb is going to drop down to the 4th string on the second beat. We're going to play the open B string on the and of that beat. Bring the thumb back to the 3rd fret of the low E string. On beat 3, play the open G on the and of that beat. And then the middle finger is going to fret the 2nd fret for our final bass note on beat 4. So that measure all together would sound like that. One more time, nice and slow. Now starting off line 3, we're still on G, but we can take our middle finger off of the 2nd fret of D to open that string back up. And we're going to start the first half of measure 1 by playing string 6, 3, 4, 2, thumb, index, thumb, middle. So a pretty familiar finger picking pattern there to start that measure off. Now at this point, if you look up to the second line, everything we're about to play on the third line is exactly the same. As you now look to line 4 is exactly the same as line 3. So really the key thing to notice in the 16 measure intro is that the only thing that's a little bit different is if we go back to the repeat symbol, and from the repeat symbol, if we look at the 3rd and 4th measure, so the 3rd measure is the final measure of line 1, the 4th is the first measure of line 2. Those 2 measures are a little variation that only occurs right off the bat there at the start of the song. Almost every time after this in the song that he plays this theme, it's always going to end with what we played in measure 4 of line 2, so that measure where we did the hammer on from the thumb to the ring finger, and then measure 1 of line 3 after that. So almost all the time we end up playing that for those measures. I encourage you to play around with all those possible variations and even come up with ones of your own. If you watch some of the performances of Jake playing this that are up on YouTube, you'll notice that he plays with quite a lot of variation throughout his different performances. So he's never really playing it as anything that's being repeated exactly. He's always playing around with the form. He's adding an extra note here, subtracting a note here, sometimes adding new little themes throughout it. So we can extend that same flexibility to ourselves as we learn it. At the same time, if you wanted to try to distill this 16 measure theme down to something most simple and most often repeated, especially on the album version, I would recommend looking to line 3, starting on beat 3 of that first measure and playing through the first 2 beats of the first measure of line 4. That would give you this. And as I said, that's what's really kind of the core of this theme. So if you wanted to just simplify it and focus on a simple 4 measures, that's really what you want to look to. Looking at lines 5, 6, and 7, these are the lines where the singing's taking place. So this is going to take us through all of what we'll play over the verses of the song. And everything we've learned up to this point, that comprises the instrumentals that go between the verses. So as we start this part off, we're going to be on a G chord, and we begin by just playing a bass pattern with our thumb. We're going to play 6, brush with the thumb, 6, 4. So that brush, you could, again, hit 2 strings, 3 strings. We're just really focusing on the rhythm there. Then in measure 2, we're going to play 2 beats of A minor. Just strum down with your thumb and let it ring. Same thing on D. And then the same thing on E minor. So each of those chords is getting 2 beats. And you see the way it works out timing-wise, kind of funny, is that E minor ends up being just a measure of 2/4, just 2 beats in that measure. Those first 3 measures of line 5 would sound like this. Okay, let's add a couple more measures, and then we'll try to relate this line to what is being sung. So as you go to measure 4 and 5 of that 5th line, we're going to be coming back to a G chord, and we're going to start by just playing our bass, 6, 4, 6, brush up on 2 and 3 with the index finger, fret the 2nd fret of the D string. Whenever that happens, by the way, technically it makes it a G6 chord, but I wanted to keep the chords just nice and simple, what their core triad would be up above the line. But just so you know, whenever that happens, that's what's happening to that chord. Pretty common theme that we might have pop up on a G chord when we're finger picking. So that would be the 4th measure of line 5. And the next measure after that, we're still on the same thing. We're going to lift that middle finger off to open up the D string to begin that measure. We're going to go 6, 3, 4, brush up on 2 and 3 again. And then the final 2 beats of that measure are just bass, 6, 4, fret that 2nd fret of D again with the middle finger. So the 5th measure of that line would sound like that. Okay, let's play measures 4 and 5 together. Let's play that whole 5th line now, and as we do, I'm going to sing the vocal part so that we can have an idea of what the lyrics are doing as we play this part. Raggy Levy, oh, oh, do Raggy Levy. Okay, that's going to bring us into line 6. Line 6, staying on a G chord to start, the middle finger can lift off. We're going to play 6, big brush down with the thumb, visit from Melba. So the thumb's going to play 6, a big brush down from 4, back to 6, 2, 4, 3. Those last 4 notes were thumb, middle, thumb, index. So that measure would sound like that. And we're going to continue on a similar theme with just a little bit of change in the bass line here as we go to E minor in the next measure. We're going to start again, string 6 with the thumb, big brush down from 4. Here's the only tiny change. Now the thumb's going to come to 5, 2, 4, 3. Again, same pattern there though, thumb, middle, thumb, index. So that measure would be... That pattern stays pretty similar as we get to the third measure of line 6. Only thing that's going to change is our bass pattern, which is just going to accommodate the fact that we're now on a C chord. So we're going to play string 5, big brush down from 4, rock that ring finger up to the 3rd fret of the 6th string for the 3rd beat, and from there we're going to play 6, 2, 4, 3, just like we did on the other chord. So that again is thumb, middle, thumb, index. Okay, as we get to the final measure of line 6, we can lift everything except for the ring finger off, and we're going to play 6, brush down with the thumb again, and then we're going to play this time 6, 3, 4, 2, and you notice on that final bass note again my middle finger fretted the 2nd fret of D, so that final measure of line 6. Okay, let's listen to that whole line. And that would sound like that. If we throw the lyrics onto that line, we get this. Raggy Levy, oh boy, just ragged as a jaybird. Okay, that's going to take us into the final line now, and the first measure of this line's cool. What we're going to do here is we're going to play, to start off, 6, 3, 4, 3. Just a nice little kind of bouncy pattern between the thumb and index finger. And then we're going to have another little 8th note pair in the bass for the 3rd beat. We're going to play the open A string and then hammer onto the 2nd fret with our middle finger. Immediately after that hammer on, the thumb comes down to the 4th string in the bass, and the index finishes that measure off on the and of 4 by playing the G string. Okay, so that measure would sound like this. In the next measure, that middle finger can just drop down to the 2nd fret of the D string as the other fingers complete the C chord form. And that's all we need. The rest is in the picking hand. We're going to play 5, alternate down to 4, and as we do, we're going to brush up with the middle finger on the first 2 strings, move that ring finger up to the 3rd fret of the low E string for the 3rd beat of bass. Another little brush up here, but this time it just moves up to the 2nd and 3rd string. Final beat is the thumb alternating back down to the 2nd fret of the 4th string. So that measure would sound like this. Okay, the 3rd measure, nice and simple. This is really what we did on the intro. And the final measure here is just 2 beats, you see again. And it's kind of funny, they probably wouldn't even really technically go there in the music, but structurally it worked to send you back to the repeat. So this is really just at the top of the page, the 2 beats you see before the repeat. I just wanted to shove it down there for you so that you can connect it easily to where you're returning at the top of the page. So really that last little bit of that line, something we played earlier, just that, and now we're back into that main instrumental theme. Let's add the lyrics to that last line so we can hear how those fit in. Mr. Simple and I'm gonna build me a stone fence. Now we're starting that final theme again. Let's hear the whole verse come together now between the guitar part and the lyrics. Raggy Levy, ho, ho, do Raggy Levy. Raggy Levy, oh boy, just ragged as a jaybird. Mr. Simple and I'm gonna build me a stone fence. Alright, and that played into the beginning of the instrumental as well. So that gives you an idea of how those last 3 lines line up with the lyrics. And, of course, the words change on later verses, but that gives you the basics for what you need to play the whole song. The last thing I would say about that part is, again, when you watch videos of Jake performing this live, especially on this part, there's a lot of variation to how he plays it. In fact, sometimes it can be pretty simple. he might just play through the chord changes, mostly playing bass notes. Tending to play those big brushes with the thumb. Now he doesn't only do that. Sometimes he'll let the index or the middle finger chime in and add some notes, but in a way that you can tell he's just kind of pattern picking. He's kind of just allowing his fingers to throw in other notes on a whim as he plays it, and I'm sure that keeps it interesting for him as he performs the song again and again, to have those little micro variations in there. So again, I encourage you to do the same thing. Allow yourself some freedom as you play through it. The music can give you a really good guideline here, the tab that I wrote out to give you an idea of what to start with. But all of this stuff, as long as that bass line's happening, all this other stuff, can happen as you choose, and that can kind of start to freshen up your playing of the song for you as you go deeper into it. That gives you an introduction to Jake Xeres Fussell. If you didn't already know about him, you should check out more of his music. He has some fantastic albums, great backing musicians that give those albums a full band sound, but then when he performs, it's often just him on a Telecaster, really intimate, powerful performances. You can tell he has a strong connection with his listeners, and he's out there playing quite a bit. So plenty of great things to listen to and learn from him. Hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you soon with another song.